north is about this way, so we're kind of looking from the north a little bit.
Mute on.
We're looking generally from the north.
Yeah. Okay. So north is that.
Correct. Slide 5 is the plan view of the North Anna 3 site, and you'll see here is the turbine building, reactor building, control building. Over here are the cooling towers, and then switch yard is over here. And you saw where we were in the previous slide in relation to units 1 and 2. If there aren't any other questions about that, I'll just give you a brief overview of the North Anna 3 history. We are a plant that started with an early site permit. So we submitted our early site permit application back in September of 2003. The NRC issued the environmental impact statement in December of 2006, and then the permit was issued in November of 2007. We submitted our COLA as an ESBWR COLA. We were the R COLA at that time in November of 2007. We had subcommittee meetings with the ACRS in June, July, and August of 2009, and then we had the full committee meeting in October of 2009, and a letter was written by the committee at that point. Then the NRC issued the supplemental EIS in February of 2010, and last month, as Dr. Riccadella said, we met with the subcommittee to present the ESBWR changes that have occurred since our last ACRS visit in 2009. And part of the reason for this, I think you all know, is because we did change technologies for a time. We went with the APWR technology in May 2010 and ended up reverting back to the ESBWR technology in 2013. So are there any questions on that before we talk about COLA changes? So we reverted back to the ESBWR design in 2013, and when we made that decision to revert back, we followed the strategy used two basic principles to make the changes to revert back to the ESBWR design. One was we wanted to standardize the content that was in the COLA as much as possible with the ESBWR DCD and with Fermi 3's R COLA. And we used the design-centered working group approach to do that, which was endorsed essentially or described originally by the NRC in a RIS, I think. And then the second piece was that we wanted to rely as much as possible on the site-specific COLA information that we had provided previously that was in the ESBWR COLA before we switched to the APWR. So as a result of that, most of the COLA content that you see before you today is consistent with the information that we previously provided in 2009. Okay? So if there aren't any questions about the approach, I'll start going through, give you an overview of some of the changes. The first change that I'd like to talk with you about is hazardous chemical analyses. So what we did was we looked at the potential accidents that's described in section 2.2 of our FSAR, and two of the accidents categories that we had to consider were explosions and delayed ignition of a flammable vapor cloud. When we did these analyses, we found that the blast effects would not exceed the peak overpressure of 1 psi at any of the safety-related structures except for storage of and transport of liquid hydrogen. So we had to do further analysis there.
Excuse me, the use of the hydrogen, are the primary uses static cooling and reactor cooling system chemistry?
That mostly reactor cooling system chemistry, yes.
Thank you.
So for liquid hydrogen, we did our analysis, and what we found, we had two 6,000 gallon capacity tanks that we analyzed for the storage. And what we did find when we did this more detailed analysis is that the actual distances between the tanks and the nearest safety-related structure exceed the calculated minimum safe distance, so we were okay there.
Just a reminder, what is the minimum safe distance?
Oh gosh, we have it. It's 7. We talked about it last time.
Sorry, I wasn't at the subject.
No, yeah, that's okay. What I'm saying is I know we have the number. It's in the FSAR, and we'll pull that up when you...
That's fine. It's just...
Yeah, it's around 700 feet.
750 is what
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
Sure. For transporting the liquid hydrogen, we assumed that we had a 13,000-gallon capacity tank, and we did a PRA there, probabilistic analysis, and we concluded that the probability of an accident involving the delivery truck is less than 10 to the minus 6 per year, which is acceptable per the NRC guidance. So we didn't have to assume that there would be any missiles from that sort of event. So as a result, we didn't have any design basis events with respect to storage or transport of chemicals.
Yeah, I was in the subcommittee meeting. This is because you designed the parking lot so that the truck doesn't have to backtrack. And I mean, this low probability of a truck having an accident is because you designed the approach to the tank properly, right?
Yes, it is designed properly.
Yeah.
That's your question.
So the probability was reduced by taking proactive action and designing it properly.
Yes, that's correct.
That's not, just for the record, so we're clear, because it's a public meeting, that's not the frequency of a truck accident. It's a frequency of a truck accident resulting in an explosion.
That's right.
Okay.
That's right.
Trucks have accidents more frequently than once in a million years.
But before we leave this topic, I think Doug from Bechtel has a comment. Yes, this is Doug Kemp from Bechtel.
Doug Kim from Bechtel. The question was on the safe standoff distance. Yes, the calculated safe standoff distance for the source analysis was 495 feet, and for the vapor cloud analysis was 677 feet.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, any other questions about hazardous chemicals before we go on? We also performed additional analyses for our local intense precipitation work, which was documented in section 2.4.2. And our analyses of the maximum inundation flood levels that result from local probable maximum precipitation found that these potential flood levels are bounded by the DCD. The DCD site parameter is 1 foot below grade, and we found that our results were acceptable there. We did further analysis looking at the sheet flow because of an RAI that we received, and in the analysis we assumed what is stipulated in the FSAR, which were certain flow directions from the rooftops for the runoff. As a result of the flow analysis that we did, we found that there were 3 locations where those sheet flow depths are above the floor elevations at the entrances to some safety-related buildings. So in the FSAR, we committed to place curbs at these entrances or to raise their thresholds to prevent water from entering these buildings. So as a result of the analysis work we did and the commitments that we've made, we found that the site grading and structure configuration precludes flooding of safety-related buildings during a local intense precipitation event. Any questions on that? All right. Another accident that we had, that we reviewed again, was the accidental release of liquid effluents to the environment. This is documented in section 2413 of the FSAR. The design of the ESBWR does include mitigating features to preclude any accidental releases of effluents. However, per the SRP 11.2, we do have to do an accidental release analysis, and we performed that analysis. We used the condensate storage tank to be as the source of our release based on ranking of the tanks and looking at the mitigating features that we have for each of the tanks. And as a result of this analysis, we found that the release from the condensate storage tank to the environment would result in concentrations and doses that are well below the 10 CFR 20 limit.
Gina, would you explain what ranking of tanks means in that context, please?
Yes, what we looked at was the concentrations of radioactive material in each of the tanks. So previously, we had used a different tank when we were here in 2009, we had used a different tank for doing the analysis, but because it had a higher radioactive nuclei concentration, but because of revisions to the NRC guidance, we were able to switch over to the condensate storage tank this time. But it's looking at the amount of radioactive material that's in the tank, each tank.
And what would be the isotopic burden in the condensate storage tank? This would be from condensate if you had a steam generator tube leak, or if you had a fuel perforation and you're carrying that isotopic inventory over into the condensate storage tank?
Let me ask our ESPWR experts if that's okay with you.
What I'm really wondering is, what is the source term upon which you would make the statement, we've ranked this tank thus and so?
And I don't have, that information is in our COLA. Do you want me to pull that up for you? Our FSAR?
Sometime in the next hour, that'll be fine.
Okay, all right. So we'll get back with you on that. Okay. Any other questions about this one? The next change that we made was actually departure from the DCD, and it involves rad waste discharge piping change that we made. So overall, Unit 3 is designed to be a zero liquid release plant. So our goal is to not release any radioactive material to the site, but it's designed to recycle all the processed water. If we do have to make a release, though, we will be, at North Anna, we'll be using a dedicated liquid rad waste effluent discharge pipeline, and that will discharge to the discharge canal. We won't be using the circulating water system's cooling tower blowdown line, which is what is currently described in the DCD. So that's the departure there. And then in SR section 12.3, we explain that and make a commitment that this discharge line that we'll be designing is going to run underground, and it will be run in a guard pipe, or it's going to be accessible via a trench or a tunnel. And so this discharge line that we're talking about complies with 10 CFR 2014-06 to minimize to the extent practicable contamination of the facility and the environment. Any questions on that? This next slide, slide 13, is about Reg Guide 1.221, which provides guidance from the NRC on design basis hurricane winds and hurricane missiles. This Reg Guide was not in place. It had not been issued when the DCD was originally submitted. So as part of the rule making for the DCD, we basically were required to do our evaluation using this Reg Guide and the guidance therein. So we did our evaluations, and we found that the seismic category 1 structures are going to be designed to withstand the loads due to the DCD tornado wind speed and missile spectrum, because the DCD wind and missile demands bound all of the North Anna 3 site-specific tornado and hurricane wind and missile demands. For seismic category 2 structures, and those structures that are housing regulatory treatment of non-safety systems, the witness structure systems and components, we're going to be designing those to withstand both the DCD criteria and the Reg Guide 1.221 hurricane wind and missile demands. So the conclusion here is that the seismic category 1 structures will meet the DCD wind speed and missile criteria, and the category 2 structures and witness structures or structures housing witness will meet the DCD and Reg Guide 1.221 criteria for hurricane winds and missiles. Okay? Now we're going to talk about seismic. That's what the next few slides are about. There were a number of drivers for the seismic revisions that we made to our COLA, and this is a list of the major ones. As you know, on August 23rd, 2011, there was an earthquake that occurred in the Mineral, Virginia area. Also, EPRI and the NRC issued some new criteria, the new Central and Eastern United States seismic source characterization sources. So we needed to use that information, and then also the ground motion model was updated by EPRI. In addition to that, the NRC revised several guidance documents, 3 SRPs, and and they issued ISG 17. So as a result of all these changes, we decided that we had to make changes both to the vibratory ground motion that is used in the seismic analysis, and then of course we had to redo the seismic analysis to incorporate these changes. This next slide, slide 15, basically shows us the process that we use to develop our seismic hazard. So you'll see we start with the seismic source, which comes from the new CEUS seismic source characterization data, and then we move that source through the ground motion. It attenuates, it comes up through the rock, site amplification occurs here, and then we eventually develop our site-specific seismic hazard, which is used in our seismic analysis. This is a summary of what I just showed you. So what we did was we updated our seismic sources using the new CEUS and updated seismicity, and it included the 2011 mineral earthquake. We revised our probabilistic seismic hazards analysis using the updated CEUS SSD and new ground motion model that was provided by EPRI. We developed our new site-specific response spectra using the revised PSHA, and then we developed our new ground motion response spectra and our foundation input response spectra, or FIRS. We redefined these using the site-specific response spectra and the new ISG 17 guidance that the NRC had issued. As a result of doing all this, we identified certain exceedances at certain frequencies of the Certified Seismic Design Response Spectra, or CSDRS, and so that was what drove us to because we hadn't had to do this before, but perform seismic analysis of the structures and some of the systems and components. This slide shows you, just as an example, the exceedances that we have for the reactor building, control building. And you'll see the black line here is the DCD CSDRS, and then the blue and red lines provide the reactor building and control building FIRS, and you'll see that just at certain frequencies starting at around 10 hertz, we have some exceedances here. The same holds true for the firewater service complex, but I don't have that slide for you.
Just a comment on that slide. It's not shown, but for those of you who weren't at subcommittee, the combination of the design spectrum plus the other ones significantly bounds the spectra from the mineral, which in the earthquake.
Thank you, sir. Yes, the mineral earthquake had it really had no impact on the results overall of the seismic analysis. So, but we did incorporate it just to confirm that. Slide 18 now talks about our seismic analysis and our evaluation of the seismic Category 1 structures. So after we got the input from the vibratory ground motion, we developed the seismic design parameters using the site-specific soil structure interaction, input soil profiles, and the ground motions, and we performed the site-specific SSI and soil structure interaction analyses so that we could evaluate the Cat 1 buildings, which are the RBFB, the control building, and the firewater service complex. And we were looking at those using our site-specific ground motion and soil properties. We used the results of those analyses to determine the site-specific seismic demands on the structures, and then we performed site-specific analyses of the structures and the components using the site-specific seismic demands, along with the other demands on those items. Finally, just to point out, the methodology and mathematical models that we used for these analyses were consistent with what was used for the DCD structures and systems and components. The results of the analyses show that there were no changes to the DCD concrete member properties. So, for example, the slabs and wall thicknesses all stayed the same as the DCD. We did have to make a couple of minor local changes to the shear ties and the reinforcement in the reactor building, fuel building exterior walls, one place there. We changed the size of a control building girder, and then we also made some modifications to the rebar and shear ties that are in the fire water service complex shear keys and base mast. For the components, there was a slight increase in the size of a support saddle bolt for the passive containment cooling system condenser, and we slightly increased the anchor bolt size and corner base plate welds for the fuel storage racks in the buffer pool. So basically, the size of the constructional analyses that we performed and the minor design enhancements that we made demonstrate the capability of the structures, systems, and components to operate at North Anna 3. Any questions about seismic? In conclusion, we just want to point out that we did, as I said earlier, implement the design-centered review approach to maximize standardization with the DCD and with the ARCOLA. We provided site-specific topics that the NRC has reviewed and evaluated, and our determination, along with the SER, is that North Anna 3 site is adequate to support construction and operation of the plant.
Gina, would you go back a slide, please?
Sure.
For the 4 changes that those 4 bullets represent, should we be thinking that each place a change has been made, there is a calculation package that has been conducted under 10 CFR 50 Appendix B demonstrating the seismic capability of the revised device?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And those reports have been submitted to the NRC for review, too. They've either seen them through audit or they're on the docket.
Thank you, Gina.
You're welcome. Questions? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Gina. That, I guess, will have the staff.
I'd still like to hear about source term on the condensate storage. Okay, thank you.
My name is Jim Shea. I'm the NRC's Division of New Reactor Licensing Lead Project Manager for the North Anna 3 review. The staff is presenting its Phase 4 SER with no open items. This is a follow-on from the Phase 2 SER with open items that was completed based on a full ACRS meeting back in October 2009. During the last ACRS subcommittee meeting, the staff presented the review highlights of the Phase 4 review and focused on, I think like Gina mentioned, the differences between the site-specific differences from the DCD and, of course, the ARCOLA with Fermi. And when you look at it, the review focus essentially is on there was 5 exemptions, there's a number of departures from the DCD, and then there's some variances associated with the ESP, and that was the staff's main focus on the review. And in the past 24 months, the review focus has really been on the seismic issue. The seismic closure plan that was submitted by Dominion in October of 2014 has been really the main focus, and you could say the longest pole in the tent of the review. Our staff along with Dominion, several hours in review time and a couple of audits in that meantime. And in fact, we held bi-weekly public meetings to go through all the issues of the seismic, to go through the seismic closure plan, answer all the REIs, address a number of issues that were raised during audits, et cetera. So that's been going on for the last 2 years.
For those members who weren't at subcommittee, we spent about 4 hours on this topic at the subcommittee meeting.
So just get to the structure of today's meeting. I'm going to do a brief highlight of what we did over at the subcommittee meeting. And you're going to see in my slides, a lot of them are coming directly from the subcommittee meeting, so I just highlighted a couple of the bottom line issues. And if there's any questions that stems from that, we have our staff that were on the panels that we had for subcommittee are here to answer any of your additional questions. And I'd just like to point out, we mentioned that our review was really, there was other issues besides the seismic, but that was the main issue that we reviewed. And I want to thank Dominion and our staff working very diligently through all these issues, several technical issues, to get to the point where we are now to be able to present this Phase 4 And there's some of the things that we have are direct duplicates of Dominion, so I'm not going to reiterate those, except just to point out, like where I highlighted some of the key things that occurred that influenced our review from the staff side, including the mineral earthquake you see in August 23rd, 2011. And a couple other things there. The seismic closure plan, which I mentioned, was submitted on October 22nd, 2014. And then the last updated revision to the FSAR, which included all the incorporation of all the changes associated with the seismic analysis, have been included in that June 22nd FSAR update. And this just kind of highlights what we already mentioned, the Phase 2 ACRS review. Mentioned that, and just a couple things with Phase 4 SCR. Now, this is a 6-phase review, so if you're not familiar with the NRO review process, Phase 2 is the SCR with open items, and then Phase 4 is the SCR with the final SCR with all those items closed, and the only thing left is really some confirmatory items. And that's really staff's findings are associated with the Phase 4. The Phase 6 is more of an admin. The FSCR is an admin review of to get it ready for basically a new reg, so it can be submitted to the commission. It goes through an administrative process, which is what we're going through now. And we did actually confirm all of the items that were open in the Rev 9 of the FSAR, and that will be included in that. Those confirmations will be included in the final SCR from the staff.
So, Jim, just to be clear, that what you're saying, we had some discussion about what the SCR, what the ACRS is actually being asked to review, and the current document that we have refers to various incarnations of the various revisions of the applicant's FSAR and the supporting DCD. And what I think I hear you saying is you're going to clean that all up between now and when you go final?
No, really. No. Everything is in Phase 4. And I think I fed back to Gurja on this issue that was brought up at the subcommittee. And
you did, and I didn't understand that. So maybe you could explain it to the rest of us.
Okay, let's see if I can do this again. So, for example...
For the committee's reference, if you read through the different chapters of the SCR, some of them refer to, and I haven't got it here in front of me. I guess for the record, I should get it here in front of me.
Well, I could probably explain it.
Let me get my thing on the record here. Share with me, because if I look at, for example, all all of the chapters except chapters 7, 16, 18, and 20 in the SCR refer to revision 8 of the COL FSAR, which is based on revision 10 of the ESBWR DCD. However, chapters 7, 16, 18, and 20 of the SCR refer to revision 7 of the COL FSAR, which is based on revision 9 of the DCD. So there's essentially 4 chapters in the version of the FSAR that we're reviewing that explicitly in writing refer to a previous, not the current revision either of the COL FSAR and the ESBWR DCD. So I was questioning about, why we have that sort of time disconnect in the SCR.
And based on your comments from the subcommittee meeting, I actually updated the slide, and you can see that in Phase 2 SCR was done per the FSAR Revision 6, July 2013, and based on DCD Revision 9. And so when you look at those, those are the confirmatory items. So open items were closed based on, like you mentioned, there was a DCD Revision 10 and FSAR Revision 8. So you're going to see there's various stages of the SCR and how it's, over the years, has evolved. And in the sense, the staff made a number of findings back in Phase 2, and nothing has changed from those decisions. And so it was based on those particular revisions that you see on that slide. And we're not going to go back and, since nothing changed in the FSAR updates except what was requested through REIs and through these open items. For example, in Phase 2, the open items were closed by the Revision 8. So all those open items had REIs associated with them, and the responses of those REIs, and then there's been some follow-on REIs associated with that, our normal process. Those were closed by that Revision 8, and for the most part. So there's 71 items, Revision 8, June 2014. So when you read the SCR, and you're going to see specific sections that were resolved back under those revisions. Now, Revision 9 hasn't changed of the FSAR.
In those areas.
Yeah, in those areas. So what you're seeing is the staff at that time, made a decision and found that acceptable. So the only place where you're going to see in the SCR where it says staff made a decision based on the Rev 9 of the FSAR, it's really in the area of the seismic in Section 3.7 and 3.8 of Chapter 3. Just as John pointed out in the subcommittee meeting, there's sections in Chapter 3 that were completed back in Phase 2 that refer back to these previous revisions. And you're going to see the same thing. This is the same, and I had to verify it myself. Based on your question, I went back to the Fermi SCR, and they have very similar types of...
I didn't check it.
Yeah.
I happened to be the chapters, some of the chapters that I was reading kind of caught my attention here that I suddenly saw different...
I took back your point, and, I didn't look at Fermi other than I did a lot of comparison, really. When you look at this SCR that we have completed in Phase 4, one of the things that I did is to make sure that it looked similar to obviously it's incorporated by reference. You're looking at Fermi, one of those that line up, and so I just confirmed that. And if there's a question there, I went back to the staff and asked them. So you'll see that. This FSCR is very similar to the Fermi FSCR, where these decisions were made for even Fermi back in that time frame of 2009, 2008, and under Revision 9 of the DCD and then following final Revision 10. So that's how it went. And in fact, if you look at now every chapter.